Namaste, namaste, namaste. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the most spectacular person sitting with us, or I should say sitting with me, but sitting with us as we're in a communion of light here. And this is the wonderful Anodea Judith, who I have been reading for many, many, many years, which we'll go into in a moment. And so firstly, ladies and gentlemen, whomever you are, wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in, whatever nationhood you're in, welcome, 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 namaste, 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 to this wonderful podcast platform known as Deep Dialogues, because that's literally what we're going to engage in. And you'll see that I will be prompting Anodea into all sorts of deep and fascinating subterranean revelations about her appreciation of this wonderful, wonderful topic, meeting the goddess. So let me give you a little bit of a more context of who Anodea is. So Anodea is the founder and director of Sacred Centers, and she is a globally recognized teacher of the divine feminine with many best-selling books about the chakras, about psychology, about yoga, about social change, and of course, about female leadership. The way that we meet in this context is through another book, her latest book, I believe, which is called Goddess, Blessed Reunion with the Feminine Face of the Divine, that has been published by Sacred Stories. This is how we come to meet. But actually, I've been reading this wonderful lady's material for many, many, many years, which started with Waking the Global Heart, which is now changed in title, which Anodea will tell us about as we go through, which is one of the most spectacular books that I've ever read. So I thank you very deeply for that, dear one, in the way that I did in our pre-show chat. So in a moment, I wonder if you could encapsulate for us this clarion call, this burning desire that you have to not just surf the arousal of the divine feminine, but to really enunciate for us in the most extraordinary ways you do within the book, Goddess, what you feel is significant about the goddess at this time that needs arousal.
Well, we have to understand that we have completely lost the goddess from our culture, so much so that she does not even come up in conversation. Even in enlightened sorts and New Age circles and spiritual groups and all that, God is a he, and it is just taken for granted. And in that loss, we have lost something so profound from society. We have lost the reverence for beauty, for love, for connection, for compassion, for the gentleness, for nature. And our civilization is so fractured from nature at this time that our very survival is at stake. And I believe you can trace this back to our divorce from the goddess religion and the loss of that. And if we are going to come into wholeness, if we're going to come into the heart, we need both masculine and feminine to make a full heart connection.
Brilliant, beautiful. And of course, you have this exquisite quote at the beginning of your book by Dion Fortune, who, for those people who don't know, was an immense female psychic and mystic who wrote countless books and lived very close to Glastonbury Tor, which of course is known as the heart chakra of the world. And quote, she said, "A religion without a goddess is halfway to atheism," which is really an extrapolation of what you've just shared with us. Why do you feel that the goddess, I know this is a sweeping question, but from a chronological point of view or from an historic point of view, why do you feel that the goddess suddenly became vapid within the consciousness of Homo sapiens?
Well, it wasn't sudden. It was over a period of time. But what I believe is that when you have a religion of the goddess, you worship the mother, you worship birth. Birth brings more babies. We had more people. And as the culture expanded, we started to bump into the limitations of resources, land and water specifically. And then the tribes started to fight each other. Well, you can imagine that it only takes one fight to be invaded by another village, where the men would say to their pregnant wives with young children, you go hide behind that rock, you go hide in the forest, and we'll pick up the club, the sword, whatever they have, and protect. That is a natural divine role for the masculine, and it would be a natural way it would fall. And as that happened, they only had to get beat up once to say, next time this tribe is coming, we're going to be ready. We're going to train our sons. We're going to train our brothers. We're going to make more swords. And society became more militarized. Now, as that happened even more, the men were taken away from the village, away from their wives and children, to go on campaigns that would be months or years at a time in a society of only men. And in that society, if you were afraid and said, I don't think this is such a good idea, I might get killed, that was a danger to the mission. And so that was not allowed. So these men got hardened by the travesties and traumas of war. And then they return home, and they've been in this masculine society, they've been hardened, they take over. And in that, they no longer respect the old divine, the old pantheons, which is both gods and goddesses. And they begin this takeover. And so it happened really over thousands of years. Until, with the onset of Christianity in the Roman Empire, then Christianity was made the religion of the state, and the old temples were destroyed, the statues were beheaded, the literature was destroyed, and the priestesses and those who espoused reverence for the goddess were killed.
And yet, as we know, we were speaking of Rome, and of course, prior to that, as you were giving us this beautiful sort of chronological breakdown of how societal dysfunction took place through war and through military campaigns, and therefore dis-eased the men, although they were unaware of this, because obviously testosterone was flying in the most extraordinary way, and it was very easy to pick up the cudgel, the sword, the saber, the spear, whatever it may be. And yet, for example, in Greece, we know that many of the ancient mystery schools were empirically empowered by the women. And I'm just thinking about, the very fontal, the very centrifuge, as it were, of Greek mysticism being the Temple of Apollo. And there was Pythia with her 7 maidens, who is called forth at this time, I believe, to provide us with the wisdom that she needs. But of course, we're talking about a preternatural portal between the mundane and the divine, rather than that aspect of our livelihood, which is the whole substance of what's taking place in a society. If we move away from the religious or the spiritual aspect of our beings. And then, of course, a big story starts. And now we are in this situation that we're in, this predicament, where we're beginning to see the destruction of Western enlightenment through our world, both within the United States of America or North America per se, and also within Europe, which is obviously another testament of what you're describing in the breakdown of the conversation between the goddess and the god, or the god and the goddess. So
let's talk about the Enlightenment for a moment, because that was an important period in the history of Western civilization where we took a giant step forward with science. And to understand, and to find out that germs cause disease, and, that the earth went around the sun, and these were major discoveries. Humanity took a giant step forward, you might say, on their right leg. But at that time, we denigrated myth. And myth was an oral truth that held people together. It gave them essence, it gave them reason, it gave them moral fiber, it gave them meaning. And when we denigrated myth in favor of science, we lost the ability to take the next step on our left leg. And so we have taken this giant step forward, but we're mired in the mud, as it were, and unable until we reclaim myth and say, what is the guiding myth for our time? And to reclaim some of these ancient divine models of order, that we have supplanted. We have disrespected that order. And I think one of the things that the Greeks kept was an honoring of that order. The Eleusinian mysteries that were practiced for 2,000 years were honoring the natural order of the divine, that the daughter follows the mother, and Demeter creates the crops, and that's how we eat, and that's how we survive. And these things were respected. When that order was destroyed, we no longer respected the divine order of nature. And that's where we really got into trouble.
Yeah. And, if we leap forward to the end of the period that is my area of scholarship within the entertainment industry, within theatre, meaning the golden age of Shakespeare, the golden age of the Elizabethan and Jacobean canons. During Elizabeth's reign, as in post-medievalism, there was an immense belief in the fact that the earth was alive with a force. The anima mundi, not the animus mundi, but the anima mundi. So we knew that if we felt unwell, if we were somehow disconnected from whatever was taking place within society, so we felt dispossessed or we felt disorientated, the first thing we needed to do was to go into nature. We would dance and sing and praise. In other words, participate, petition and praise. And we felt once more enlivened by the anima mundi, by the inspiration, the inspirare, the inspirazione. And then suddenly, of course, as we know at the beginning of the 17th century, the world of science said, no, the earth is merely a lump of matter hurtling through space. Now, as we know that and you annotate this beautifully within the book, that as we know, the world of Western science is that, or rather the concept of Western science has taken over and brought us some extraordinary processes of innovation and development, shall we say, evolutionary development from a cerebral point of view. And so we're able to quantify in a way that we weren't in 450, 500 years ago. But as a result, something else is missing. And now there is this deep need for a rebalance. Would you agree?
Oh, I would absolutely agree. There is a very deep need for that rebalance. We cannot go forward, again, without being able to take a step on our left leg. We need both legs. A butterfly needs a right and a left wing to fly. When we are terribly one-sided, Carl Jung said, when anything gets to be extreme in its one-sidedness, it is about to become its opposite. And so we see an extremism in many ways, and we even talk about that in politics, and in terrorists and extremists, that this is getting extremely lopsided. And he talked about it within the psyche, but it also applies to the culture. So this extreme hyper-masculine, hyper-white, European dominant is now, it's got this other leg of diversity and women and the beauty and the celebration that kept us in contact with the divine in a way that was joyful and celebratory and beautiful and creative. And theater is one of the things we managed to keep from that time. The rituals were theater.
Oh, literally. Absolutely. And yet, one of the reasons, I will be quite candid about this, one of the reasons why 15 years ago I stepped away from something that I'd experienced, had been lavished by, had been fed by, had been nourished by, and also did a tremendous amount of nourishing myself in the sense of the educational role that I had, because I shifted from being an actor at the end of 70s and spent 30 years working as a coach, training actors, and so on and so forth. That 15 years ago, I saw that there was a different breath taking place within the entertainment industry, where the lyricism of the divine feminine that we've just applauded was being denied through the perspective of woke. So, for example, last year I did a masterclass for a leading theatre school in London, with the finalist actors, the graduate actors. And I was told categorically, do not use Shakespeare, even though I was there as a classicist. I was there about the embodiment of these words from a classical perspective, the Renaissance voice.
Why didn't they want you to use Shakespeare?
The actors were literally suggesting they would not perform Shakespeare because it was imperialist.
I see.
So the all-pervasive shift of that rather insidious countenance within woke culture, because we know it's vociferously imbalanced and it's purely about exploring whatever's going on within the cerebral, is also entering into the onto the high altar of what great theatre or great words can be about, to express. As you say in the book, embracing the goddess allows us to reclaim magic and mystery, to re-engage with enchantment, love, and beauty, to delight in imagination and creativity, and to ground ourselves once again in the sacred wholeness of nature.
Mm-hmm.
That is being denied.
Yes.
Fascinating. Now, this is
a problem, if I may say, this is a problem that has happened repeatedly through history, where something new comes along, and because that's the newest thing, the old thing that preceded it is denigrated and thrown out. That's the mistake we make. It's not the mistake in incorporating something new. That's part of evolution, but we do not throw out the old. You know, when the Christianity came along, we threw out the goddess. When science came along, we threw out myth. You're talking about now this, they throw out Shakespeare. You know, it's a mistake to throw out what has been before. I mean, even in healing, when we discovered the germ, all other forms of healing were thrown out that were more energetic, that were more holistic, and replaced with drugs to treat germs. That was a wonderful discovery, but we should not have thrown out all the rest.
Beautiful. And so not just as a panacea, but actually as a cure to the state that we find ourselves in today, which of course, as we know, is from a collective point of view, moving to a form of brutality where our very existence is being threatened. From the voice of the divine goddess, how can we bring about a rebalance?
Well, the voice of the divine goddess wants to bring in the values that we have left behind. You know, we've had many waves of feminism. You know, women have been waking up and fighting for equal rights and equal pay and the right to vote. And all of that has been really women fighting for the right to enter a man's world. But we have not said what is the feminine world that got left behind. And I think the next wave of feminism is truly a feminism, which is saying, how do we balance the masculine? How do we marry the masculine? How do we balance these values in the world where beauty is as important as efficiency, and where creativity is as important as functionality, and where love and community are as important as, you know, the order that gets things done, the hierarchical order, where we find that peace is as important as domination, if not more so. That the goddess would say, my values have been denigrated. And without these values, you cannot proceed to a healthy society.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the exquisite textures of your work, through what you're saying to us now, and also what you're revealing through the book, is the points of definition that you're bringing about what is actually taking place, and as a result of what is taking place, what the cures or what the panaceas could be, which is beautiful. And this needs to be done because, after all, everything else is beginning to reach into a state of chaos where truth and falsehood are up for grabs and everybody's full of excessive opinionation rather than touching into, you know, where are the values of what the essence of the essence of Western Enlightenment was all about, which, after all, has at its very core a belief in the sanctity of the individual. Interesting. And,
Yes.
you know, on one level, I'm noticing, and in fact, I was working with two last year, leading individuals such as political journalists who are agnostic, are stepping forward and speaking about Western Enlightenment and what needs to be done so that it doesn't actually perish. Because, we're seeing all of the great changes within our living societies, particularly in this country, as I'm sure you've heard, that in the statistics were that in 1991, 93% of the population in the United Kingdom claimed themselves to be British. Today, it's 13%.
Oh, yeah.
Immigration actually taken over, do you see? And that's, that's another complete, very, very extraordinary subject, but also a very complex one, which isn't necessarily part of our conversation, our dialogue today, but, it's just as a point of illumination. So you're defining very beautifully what is taking place and the rebalance that needs to occur. How can we as individuals, if we move from the outer definition to the inner reality, how can we bring alive the goddess within ourselves?
Well, first of all, by becoming more embodied. Patriarchal religion is very cerebral. It's very intellectual. It's about leaving the body and going up to heaven, and leaving the earth and going to heaven. And it's the afterlife. And it's very conceptual. And the goddess is very material. She is and it's not just material. It's to say, we have such a divorce between spirit and matter right now that if we even say it's material, it's like an insult. It's like saying material is devoid of spirit. Matter is never devoid of spirit. Nature is a beautiful expression of spirit and extreme intelligence. And so coming back into the body, into what you're feeling in your body, into being able to move and be comfortable and be sensuous in your body. And sensuous doesn't mean only sexual. It means, how do the clothes feel on your skin? How does the food taste? What is the sound? And, it's the sensate experience of life. That puts us in touch with the goddess. And it is not something to leave or divorce from, but to come back home to. So in the goddess book, I talk about coming home to the goddess, coming back home to the earth, home to who we are, home to the balance of feminine and masculine within ourselves, and especially for men to be able to have some feminine qualities and not have to keep that at bay and to celebrate that. And men are so shamed for having feminine qualities in this culture and for being gay. I mean, it's just a crime. And so for that to be more accepted, women can have more of their masculine then, and we have more balance. And I say that coming home to the goddess, home stands for the holy order of Mother Earth. And that there is an order, a divine order and intelligence in nature. It is so much older than we are, and everything is worked out. I'm reading this book now on the intelligence of plants and their amazing communication between each other and between the animals. I mean, this has all been worked out in a holy order. And it is defined. And holy comes from the word whole, to make whole, the same word that the word heal comes from. It means to make whole. So to heal ourselves is to come back into wholeness with our bodies, with the earth, with both God and goddess, masculine and feminine divine, in partnership, in integration. And that is wholeness. That is what Jung felt the journey was about, the integration of anima and animus, of light and shadow, of, the adult and the inner child. This is our healing, to become whole once again with what has been rejected.
And
I was a therapist.
Again, wonderful.
Oh, okay. I was a therapist for 20 years, and my job was to help people reclaim their wholeness or find their way back. And over, it was reclaiming parts of themselves that had been rejected along the way, that they thought was not okay. Their tears or their anger or their sexuality or their power or their creativity, to find these parts that have been rejected and reclaim them once again and bring them into the whole.
Mm. And so from a sound point of view, we're trying to find something that is infinitely more sound in the sense of its trueness, its sincerity, its wholeness, its integrity. We're bringing things back into, we're bringing life back into harmony. So the points of definition are exquisite from my reckoning as we speak. But I wonder if there is something else that we need to reconstitute within the whole of our psychophysical reality. And that is the value of feeling. We have great value in relation to thought. And of course, it's prized in our world through philosophic and educational institutions. But of course, you and I know that the intellect has become a tyranny. And more and more, one of the great things that concerns me as a voice coach, as a sound healer, is that wherever I go in the world, what I'm hearing is everybody living in their heads. So everything goes on, just goes on like this the whole time. But there is no experience of resonance within the body.
That's right.
Whereas we know that when we go to those people who inspire us most, those people who tender us most with care, that there is an evocation of love within them, and that their bodies, their thoughts, their feelings, their apparatus, the way that they allow us, as you were saying about your own therapeutic background. I've been a healer for the last 45, 50 years, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And for me, the majority of the people that come to me, God bless them, keep coming, is because they're not in flow. And the reason why they're not is because we're not feeling the power of the breath, which of course means that we yield and surrender to the substance of what our inner lives are really all about. And as a result of that, of course, automatically, I mean, this is a little bit limp in my description, automatically, he says. But, when we're breathing freely, our voices are always free. But if we stop breathing, our voices become constricted, and we put them in the head, and they have that high nasal ring, because that's the sound of the cerebrum. That's the sound of opinionation and the competitiveness. That's all about. Anyway, so it feels to me that there's another aspect of the equation that needs to be awoken within us experientially. Love the definitions, but what about feeling as the language of the soul? And therefore the re-evocation of...
Yeah, I mean,
Please.
I totally resonate and believe that feeling is the language of the soul. Without feeling, there is no texture to our experience. In the chakra system, feeling is the second chakra, which is the water element. Now, the water element, if you don't have it, life becomes very dry. But if you want life to be juicy, which is what we all want, isn't it? We need some water. We want to have a juicy life that is full of sensuous aliveness. I feel that it is not the meaning of life that we seek so much as it is our aliveness. Once we have our aliveness, the meaning of life is obvious. We don't ask that in those moments. And so the feeling life is what it gives us our embodied experience of connection of the inside and the outside. And here's a thought to explore. I was in Peru last December with some shamans there, and one of them was teaching me of their philosophy based on the Southern Cross, which is a constellation you see in the Southern Hemisphere. And they believe that the vertical line of the cross is time, and that is masculine. And the horizontal line is space, and it's feminine. And so I've been musing on that ever since, and realizing that as a woman, I was the only female in my generation. I had 2 older brothers, that I was never given space. And for me, in many ways, that pushed my breath up here, because I was not given the space to speak. So I couldn't drop down into myself. I had to push my way between the masculine words that were flying rapidly back and forth. And so I think that what we have right now is a time in the world where the space has been squashed, and the space of our environment, the space of our social cohesion, the space of our political cohesion, all of that is collapsing by the times that we are in. And I think that is symbolic of the masculine time dominating the feminine space. I mean, sometimes I say that men have given us a world full of marvelous things. We have computers and cell phones and cars and airplanes and hospitals and marvelous things, but they have trashed the place in the process. Men have a thing, women have a place. And so we don't need more things now. We need to clean up the place and realize the place holds sacred meaning for us all to land in. And that place inside ourselves and in the earth and in our environment and with each other.
Wonderful. And of course, we know that there's a great wave of intention in relation to the reality of what you speak at this time on our planet, particularly within the human potential movement, within the mind, body, spirit community, because we're all waking up to our reverence for the earth through shamanism and other modalities or other traditions, other very important activities. But as a result of that, becoming more healthy with the earth within our inner beings, so that we balance, as you were saying earlier, the flow of water and then moving into the air and then into spirit, earth, water, air, fire. Yeah, how intriguing, because in the Hermetic principles, the teaching is the axis mundi and the anima mundi. So when the anima mundi was contracted by the scientists, we stopped breathing. We didn't breathe wide, so we didn't actually have an awareness of the spaciousness that you were talking about. We were merely working on a rectilinear way. So the first thing we do, we don't go to the feet. Everything becomes very competitive. We go into the head so that we can start to use words as the axe or the sword or the bow and arrow or the cudgel or the, whatever weapon was actually used. And one of the things that's, of course, happening today, as you well know, is that many people are stressed out, and so they're going to their massage therapists or their yoga teachers or whomever, and they're told, but you're not breathing. You're not breathing. Breathe into the diaphragm. Breathe into the diaphragm. And then, of course, for me, that one of the greatest vocal problems when people come to me who are working as presenters or as performers or, whatever role they're fulfilling, and they have a vocal disability, I check their breath. And the reason for why the vocal disability has occurred is because they're just breathing into their abdomens. Whereas if we actually open up the rib, if we're breathing spaciously and widely, and then allow the diaphragm to naturally lower itself, we have this wide, deep capacity of the wholeness of us being expressed in that moment.
And then that is felt by other people who listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is we know really we're reaching into a space of the rebalance of God, Goddess means that we move into that whole center where we conduct our behaviors from an empathic, mutual respect, collaborative, co-creative point of view. And so we seek union with other, because we know that when we seek union with other, the fruits of our endeavors become even greater.
Yeah.
In terms of their abundance, in terms of their celebration, in terms of their efficacy, in terms of their success, rather than competing against one another. So it's interesting, isn't it, that the richness of the landscape that you are rediscovering, because I'm sure you've been doing this in many other past lives, but rediscovering for today, have these parallels in relation to what I'm sharing, which is why I felt there was a great affinity to your conversation in the world and my conversation in the world. One of the questions that I'm intrigued by, that I've often asked people in this situation, is that if feeling is the language of the soul, the difficulty is that we become so cerebralized that we're losing a feeling linguistic. We no longer have the words. It's interesting.
Yes, we
I
lose
ask somebody how they feel, and they automatically.
Yeah, we lose our emotional literacy. And emotional literacy is gained when you're a child and you're upset about something and your parents look at you and say, oh, you don't like this, or oh, you're hungry, or oh, you're scared. And then we learn, oh, that word matches this feeling inside my body. And we learn an emotional literacy. So then we can grow up and say, you know, I'm a little frightened right now, or I'm a little worried, or I'm a little, you know, angry right now, or whatever, that we have the language for it. And these emotions are the way we can relate soul to soul. I say the mind is close to the spirit, but the soul is close to the body. And we need all four to really be balanced in the heart.
And so I'm sure you would agree that in all of the work that I do, wherever I am, I'm encouraging a redevelopment of this aspect of our consciousness, which was very alive prior to the Age of Enlightenment, just speaking as a Western individual. It was very alive, otherwise we would not have the language that we have, that poured out of the post-medievalism and moving into the Elizabethan Renaissance. We would not have those words.
And
because
prior
the limits of my world, the limits of my language are the limits of my world.
That's right. And prior to the Enlightenment, most people could not read or write. Prior to the Enlightenment, most people could not read or write. And so everything was an oral tradition. And what stayed with you was what impacted you that someone told you. It wasn't something you read. And it's interesting that we now talk about the literal truth. Literal has its roots in literary. It means the truth that was written down, like the truth of the Bible was a written truth. But that written truth is frozen in time. Whatever you write, and as a writer, you've written a book, so have I. Life changes and your book is printed and it's the way it is. But oral traditions are always moving. They're always in the moment of now, and they're how we relate and connect to each other.
And this is what I meant by the detonation of the idea, a metaphoric consciousness, because a metaphoric consciousness is not one that is fixated upon the printed word, is actually alive within the context of the vitality of what is all about, as well as saying something, oh, that's truly beautiful, or whatever, whatever. So again, going back to what you were saying earlier, we become very alive within the sensory, the sensual and the sexual aspect of our natures. And when this starts to happen, our pulse changes and our breath rhythm changes, so that we become more alive within the flesh of our being. And so therefore we feel more, and therefore we want to keep exploring what those feelings are all about, not in terms of the neuroses, but and the traumatic feelings, the pain body feelings, but we move into the bliss land of what delight and wonder and awe are actually all about.
Okay, and we actually move into... Oh, you froze. We actually move into satisfaction. The cerebral does not bring us satisfaction, but going out in nature and watching a sunset and sitting there quietly while the sun goes down and the colors change and the birds become quiet, that has an element of satisfaction. And when we have a society that is perpetually dissatisfied, it is a society that wants to take more and more and more. It's a society of hungry ghosts that are trying to fill an emptiness that can't be addressed in the way they're trying to fill it. It can only be addressed by coming back to the sensory experience of nature and feeling fulfilled by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just reading a note because we're experiencing a time lapse in our conversation, and it's purely and simply to do with the technology of the internet. Now there's a delay, and so I'm just being asked by our comptroller to give a little bit of a space after statement.
We are speaking between London and California right now, so that's quite a distance.
Where are you in California?
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. North.
You're in the Bay Area. Yeah. So, Anodea, with the book, what are your, as we're speaking about the arousal of the goddess, the arousal of the divine feminine, what are your desires for the book?
Well, the desires is that it awakens something in people that helps them feel like they're coming home. When I was working in my pagan community years ago, where I was ordained as a priestess, when people came into our community after experiencing one of our rituals or celebrations, they say, I feel like I'm coming home. They felt like they were coming home to who they'd always been, to something they'd always believed, but they didn't have anybody naming it or doing it or exhibiting it. And so then they felt like they were coming home. So I want people to read the book and feel like it brings them home to themselves, to what they know in their body and their hearts to be true, and to be able to recognize the divine feminine, who in truth has never gone away. You know, it's just our attention has been taken from her, but she has never gone away. She's right outside in the tree in my backyard. So to begin to see that again and to value that again. And then when those values change, everything else changes.
Mm-hmm. And of course, from a literal point of view, we've had some very remarkable women appearing on the world stage that have begun to alert our attention to the possibility of what the deficit is all about, and how we need to turn, maybe deficit is not quite the right word, but of moving into a celebration of this aspect of deep magic and imagination and mysticism that you're talking about, which is, as we were saying earlier, you know, is being quashed. One of them was Diana.
That's right. And you worked with her. Yes. And she was an icon of the feminine. She was a feminine archetype. Another archetype that has been able to embody the goddess with permission of the patriarchy, so to speak, is the diva. The woman who gets on stage in her sexy costume and she sings and she dances, which is, after all, what we did in ritual. We sang and we danced. And that was a priestess of the goddess, actually. And now that is a way that the goddess came alive in patriarchal culture. And we see someone like Taylor Swift, who has just, you know, swept the world with her powers of really being the diva on stage, being the goddess. So many of these archetypes that have been lost are now starting to come back. The priestess, the oracle, the midwife, you know, the mother, the maiden, the crone, the three aspects of the goddess, the queen. When we start to recognize that these archetypes have value, then we see them more. And we are enriched by that.
And you write about the archetypes very elegantly and very succinctly in the book. I wonder if you could take us a little bit deeper into, why do you feel that the pith of the archetypal consciousness is so important for us?
Yes. Well, the archetypes, you know, it comes from the word arche, which is order, and type to strike, like striking, ironsmith striking. And so it is like the striking of a generalized type from which we all descend. And it gives us an identification with something higher than ourselves. So, you know, I grew up never hearing the word of the goddess. You know, when I said to my mother, how come God is male? Oh, honey, that means all of us. It's just how we refer to it. Well, how come we talk about people as he? Well, that means everybody. Well, it didn't mean everyone to me. That didn't include me. And so in the archetypes, we can see ourselves. When I work with my archetype cards that I've created, the She Rises deck, and I work with it with women and even men, something comes alive in them. They shake, they laugh, they cry. Something is awakened in them that has been asleep, and they never had a form to recognize it. When I was ordained as a priestess, I was given by my community a permission to have power, but in a feminine way. You know, I looked at power in the masculine and I said, well, that's not me. But I wanted power in my life. We all do. I didn't find a way until then to hold it in a feminine way. And so I'm hoping that the Goddess book awakens the feminine, makes people realize what they've lost and has them begin to seek it, because the seeking is the journey. It's not something to find. There is a song I pick. Have you seen The Goddess Friend? I seek in all my travels. I pick up the slightest thread. Her mystery unravels. And so it is coming into the mystery, which draws us deeper and deeper into the initiatory journey, the enlightenment of really being immersed in our direct knowing.
And so the archetypes are keys into our consciousness by which we can actually really discover the true value of what being a spiritual being having a human experience is really all about. And you evoke the female archetypes, the feminine archetypes, very beautifully in the book. I wonder if you could, and you started talking about Taylor Swift, etc., etc., etc. I wonder if you could identify any other people, other women rather, within our society who are leading us in the way that Taylor Swift and Diana, maybe, you know, Oprah, etc., etc. Those superstars.
I would say, I would say Mother Teresa. She's no longer alive, but she was the embodiment of the compassionate mother. And so she was called mother. She wasn't called Grandmother Teresa. She wasn't called Sister Teresa. She was the mother archetype in its endless compassion. You know, Michelle Obama has, you know, she really touched hearts even more than her husband, Barack Obama. And many people wanted her to run for president, but she was an archetype of a woman of her own power. And she spoke from the heart. She told stories. She related to people. Oprah, of course, you know, she is a, you know, what I call the Empress archetype. She has an empire. She has a media empire, but she is an empress of that. Different than a queen. An empress presides. A queen or a king rules, but an empress presides and allows everyone else to contribute, and, you know, finds the world's needs and gets people inspired to contribute to something. So these are some examples. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly political figures that are stepping forward. Some of them have to be more like men in order to do that. And, you know, you can see in the US, we have not been ready for a woman president yet. It's been, you know, 242 years and we still have not elected one. So it's quite a long time. And I hope I live to see that.
Well, we're getting closer and closer, it feels, because of the literal characters that have stepped forward. Marianne, Kamala Harris, and you know, maybe even Alexandra will step forward eventually. Maybe she is actually being groomed for that role. And I'm sure there are others. I'm just not that absolutely familiar in this moment with who they are. So we're getting closer and closer. It's understandable why there has been a dispute over this, because of the nature of what we were sharing earlier in our conversation, in our deep dialogue, about the pursuit of the intellect, which is essentially a male preserve, which of course has become more egalitarian or more equal as a result of the feminist movement, as a result of suffrage and the feminist movement, which is absolutely amazing. Indeed, it will be very, very interesting to see where we carry ourselves. And if we can move forward, not through desperation, but through inspiration. And that's, I may say, that's what I would like your book to be able to provide people. And I feel that you're dealing with some very complex points of inquiry. But what's so beautiful is that the language that you use is not simplistic in the slightest. It has elegance and grandeur about it, but you're immensely succinct. You take very extraordinarily rather lofty concepts and you make them very, very earthy. So I feel just within the wave of your writing, there is the implicit nature of what we're talking about, of the rebalance between the God consciousness and the goddess consciousness. And, you know, what's interesting actually in your bio on the back of Awakening, you're referred to as being a prophetess of our time. And so as we move towards the finality, the completion of our conversation, I wonder what you personally would love to achieve at this point in your life as this very accomplished woman, what you would want to achieve, Anodea in relation to Anodea, rather than Anodea in relation to her role in the world, or indeed into the impact that she's making in the world.
Well, I'm part of the Evolutionary Leaders Council, and we were meeting yesterday, and it's a bunch of thought leaders, and someone was saying, well, I don't know if I'm a thought leader. And it struck me that it's not thought leaders that we need so much as heart leaders. And so what would I like to push? I've written books that have an intellectual aspect to them. I would like to become, and it's work within myself to do that, more of a heart leader, and leading people into the realm of the heart, which is the realm of connection, the realm of balance, the realm of peace, the realm of wholeness, the realm of a full breath. It's, in the chakra system, the heart is the element air. And so to return people home to the heart, I think that the goal of spiritual realization is not the crown, but it's going up to the crown and bringing it back down to connect the lower chakras with the upper chakras in the integration of the heart.
And isn't it interesting? I had a conversation the other day with a scientist who was fixated upon the fact that this is the seat of the soul, that the pineal is the seat of the soul. And I said, no, I don't believe it is. I believe the heart is the seat of the soul. And after all, what we're seeing is this wonderful innovation of drawing all of our attention to the thymus, which, as we're seeing, is this extraordinary central nerval impulse, this attitudinal muscle that is drawing the pineal and the heart and the intelligence of the solar plexus together. And so again, there's a physiological description in a slightly sketched fashion, as I've just done, of what you were talking about earlier in relation to moving towards holism, moving into wholeness. And the heart has to be the center.
It is the center. It's recognizing it as the center. And I think that change is as profound as realizing that the earth goes around the sun, not the sun going around the earth. That realization of the actual order of the universe. This is the natural order. It is in the center. In the chakra system, there are 3 chakras above and 3 chakras below. And the heart is actually the symbol of the sacred marriage, the 6-pointed star. Spirit coming down into matter, matter rising up into spirit, perfectly balanced and integrated in the heart. And that is where we find our wholeness. I think that is where we're going. I still believe we are going through a planetary initiation from the love of power to the power of love as an organizing principle.
And which of course is really the raison d'etre for this, isn't it? For your particular book, which is now called, it's not called Awakening the Global Heart, it's called...
Yeah, I updated it, and it is now called The Global Heart Awakens. And part of it was that waking didn't translate into other languages in the same way. So, The Global Heart Awakens, more like it is actually happening. And underneath everything, I still believe it is happening. It just does not look that way right now.
On parallel, about 13 years ago, maybe 14 years ago, when I first committed myself to text, because I'm a speaker, not a writer, so I've learned how to write. And early stages of writing were really meager. However, I've developed the muscle of writing, and because I was sought after by a publisher for the Alchemy of Voice book. But my second book, the publisher said, do you have a second book? And I said, yes. It's called The Heart Speaks. And we were going to publish it as such. But then, just before publishing, we actually ran into a huge conflict with a leading US cardiologist who was about to publish her book, The Heart Speaks, which of course had nothing to do with the nature of the linguistic, the verbalization, or indeed the energy of the opening of the heart. It was purely technical and mechanistic. However, so I did what was honorable and stepped aside and said, let's call it The Heart's Note, which is what all of my work is all about, because we each have a signature node. We each have a center to the vocal compass that we have. And of course, interestingly, where does it lie from a physiological point of view within the geometry of our body? Right in the heart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That
But
is the resonant chamber.
Sorry?
Oh, that is the resonant chamber.
This is the resonant chamber, yeah. And so it feels that we have drawn together a number of really powerful, very inclusive aspects of the arousal of consciousness that's taking place at this time. And what I would love to do is draw people to where they can find you. And I'm sure we will obviously include your website on any description in association with this podcast. But I wonder, Ryan, I don't know if you actually received my email. Do you have Anodea's website?
I have about 7 websites, so I'd have to pick which one.
Well, actually, I think I have it here in front of me. No, I took it away because I sent it through to Ryan. It's AnodeaJudith.com. There we are. He's done it. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That's the main one. And also SheRisesMovement.com.
SheRisesMovement.com.
And SacredCentersAcademy.com. That's my school.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic. And so if people go to what they're looking at here, they will be able to find all of your books.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Or they'll find derivatives that lead them to.
At She Rises Movement, they'll only find the Goddess book and the archetype cards. But at AnodeaJudith.com, they'll find my books. And at Sacred Centers Academy, they'll find my books. Yeah.
Fascinating. Fascinating. How wonderful. And is there anything that you would love to share with the community about the next project or the next point of inspiration?
Well, I've been working lately with something called the Founding Mothers Movement, which is a coalition of women's groups, peace groups, environmental groups, and spiritual groups. And we've only been going about a year, but we've amassed about 200 groups and hundreds of thousands of people to stand for gender equity and peace. And it is women, I think, that are going to bring peace to the world. And it is something that we can only dream of reaping the benefits of. But when we no longer spend money causing war, causing trauma, and we can take that to benefit society, we can take leaps that we can only dream of.
And it was 15 years ago that His Holiness the Dalai Lama said the next chapter of history will be rewritten by the women and the girls. I absolutely, totally celebrate. This has been a wonderful, wonderful deep dialogue. Thank you so much for this time to share with us all of this rich information. And ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are listening in, watching, I hope that you're resonating and ricocheting with all of this wonderful information, and not only the information, but also that you feel the spirit that is within this, because the Spiritus Mundi is speaking through Anodea. And of course, we know it's not just the voice of the goddess. The voice of the goddess is within her. And this is the way forward, isn't it? In relation to the substance of what you were sharing archetypically, that it seems to me that what we're all being led towards is a level of sovereignty, where the king and the queen become one. The god and the goddess become one. The male, female become one. The effort and the freeness become, the thought and the feeling become one within us. And that we reside right in the center of what this beautiful corpus is all about. And as a result of that, we will change our world into a much happier place. So thank you very much for sharing all these wonderful thoughts and feelings. And
thank you, Stewart. And it's a delight to just listen to you. And you write beautifully. I found that in your book. I was underlining everything and going, oh, I just love the way he put this. But it is a treat to listen to your voice, because obviously you embody what you teach. And it's an honor to talk with you.
Well, bless you. Thank you. I cherish that. Thank you very much indeed.
All right. Keep up the wonderful work you're doing.
Oh, I'm in my early 70s and I have just started.
Yeah, I'm in my early 70s and I'm tired. Yeah, it's funny when you get to your 70s. It's a little different. I never thought I would slow down, but it does slow you down a bit. At least slows me down. Maybe I just need a break, but
things are happening. Well, I hear you and I totally respect what you're saying, but all that you've shared with me in emails, it seems that you're really busy.
I'm terribly busy. I keep trying not to, and then I get these invitations that are too good to refuse. So it's how it is.
Well,
when we
thank
choose
you
to
again on behalf of the whole audience that are watching in either, in immediate future tense or in far future tense, all around the world. Thank you for being with us. Please stay where you are while we close down. And for all of you listening in, thank you for being here. And don't forget, go to Anodea's website. And if you need to know more about the mysticism that I've been sharing, go to theangelsofatlantis.com. Because if you go to stewartpearce.com, you'll see a very corporate site, which is all about, discovering the efficacy of the magnetic voice, which is magical in itself. But you'll think, well, wait a minute, what's he going on? All this spiritual stuff he's going on about. And I know that Anodea will join with me saying, namaste, namaste, namaste.